Good afternoon, everybody. Justice Bartlett, your bedhead mystic here. Taking a deep breath, just letting life catch up. I was sitting here doing the thing that I usually do at about, I don't know, between 1 and 2 in the afternoon, which is eating my breakfast. And I made a video yesterday or the day before about myself getting ready and talking about self-care. And it was fun. I had a really good time doing with it. It was just kind of impromptu. So I thought I'd kind of do the same thing here. And I was thinking about it, like, who sits around in their nightgown, right, till 2 in the afternoon, until 2 in the afternoon and doesn't eat until then. Me, I do. And I felt this kind of wave of sort of shame wash over me, like it's really self-indulgent for you to do this, and nobody's gonna relate to you if you share this because most people are off doing but da 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 da. And and I'm like, well, fuck that. How are we supposed to build different models for moving away from the grind and to stop glorifying busy unless we see people doing it, unless we see people living it, right? So here I am, 2 in the afternoon, living it, just having some coffee, having the third cup of coffee and breakfast with you beautiful people. Hi, Jenny. She says, I do it if it's my day off. Nice. Or if you're working a night shift, right? It doesn't necessarily indicate that things aren't getting done. Things are getting done. Things get done. It's amazing. I've set my life up to where I'm not plugged into the main grid. I don't do a 9-to-5 job. I'm trying more and more to allow my creativity to lead and shape and structure my life, because at the core and at the heart of me and who I am and what I do, I'm a communicator. So one of the primary ways that I communicate is through writing. You can read a lot of articles, over 154,000 words by me at elephantjournal.com/Justice Bartlett. You can read a few on my website at bedheadmystic.com, and I just started a Substack, and I'm working on books. But the trouble with working on books for me, as opposed to putting out articles, is it's the fucking dopamine, dude. Seriously. Because when I write an article, I get to hit submit and I get to share it with the world instantaneously. And there's this beautiful feedback, and there's dopamine. Dopamine is real, and it's necessary. And it's one of the things that when we live too fast-paced, when we spend too much time online, we hijack our dopamine receptors. So for somebody like myself who has a history with addiction, rebuilding your ability to manufacture, produce, and utilize dopamine, it's effort. It's hard work. It's great, stop doing the thing that you're doing that makes you sick or dysfunctional, right? But then what do? That's not enough. That's not where the victory story is. The victory story is, how do I rebuild myself? And what goes into the intentional rebuilding of a person after they've sort of turned themselves down, however times you go through that in your life, right? So dopamine's a thing, and it's one of the reasons why the majority of us are on social media all the time, why we like those little likes and those little heart buttons and the reactions and all of that, is it feeds our dopamine receptors. So when it comes to doing my major projects, getting the momentum going, getting the structure going to where I'm committed and devoted to it, more than anything, it's probably a dopamine issue. So it's funny what do you have to do if you like the instant gratification? What do you have to do if you like to get that hit? You have to do the opposite of what your system's been conditioned to do. You have to slow way the fuck down. So it's countercultural too, slowing down. There's all this, the glorification of the grind. Maybe I'll write an article on that. I think that would be a great topic to share with people. We're always, think about it as adults, like what are our kind of like primary talking points? I'm so busy, I have this on my plate, I have to do this, and I have to do this, and I have to do this. And there's this sort of, if you're not conscious about it, pay attention for it, because I'm willing to bet that it's there. There's this kind of underlying sort of shame or maybe guilt, one of the two, right? Or even at least just sort of a discomfort if we're not constantly kind of like priming and priding ourselves in our productivity. It's a good tagline. Priming and priding ourselves in our productivity. And we can tell the degree to how much we've sort of internalized and acclimated ourselves to what are essentially manufactured capitalist values by how much we prize and pride ourselves on our overproductivity. Pause, breathe, think, chew. There's definitely something to be said. There's a lot to be said with getting shit done. We have to get shit done. It doesn't do itself. That's part of being an adult, is our ability and efficacy with completing tasks and skills, right? It's something that has to be done. And yet, there's this wonderful way that things get done when we slow down. One of the things that I struggle with, that I've talked a lot about openly, is that my system was pretty much wired for anxiety since I was a little child. And I actually didn't even realize it until I was in my late 30s, that I tended to function on a pretty high anxiety plane for most of my life. I don't know if I didn't put into context what anxiety was, or if I just didn't relate to myself as being anxious. One of the reasons is possibly because, being an anxious overfunctioner, I'm also very good at making other people comfortable. And so one of the ways that I would manage my own anxiety was to be constantly managing my environment, managing my relationships, and making sure everybody else was at ease. So everybody would kind of relate to me as being this kind of baseline. Like, a good friend one point in time said she loved being around me because it was like being around a person who just like emanated Valium. And I'm like, okay. It's nice to have a calming effect. It's good, particularly if you're co-regulating emotionally and neurologically with another human being. But Valium, to me, like, it has the connotation that, like, what she enjoyed about me was that I was actually kind of numbing myself. And I very much was at that point in my life, particularly when this conversation occurred. And numbing, it's not a genuine calm. And it's a pretty lousy place to get things done from, because what we tend to do when we're numbing is we don't pay attention. It's a trance state. We don't notice. We're not alive and attentive to the processes and cycles and energies that are moving through us or around us, within us, transpersonally, relationally. We're just kind of there. And when something does need to get done, it's often kind of almost where it comes from a shock factor. So I used to be very good, and I am actually still quite good at kind of waiting till the last minute to do things, because I can generate this kind of sense of internal urgency around the task that needs to be accomplished, which sort of gears up my energy in a way where it's like, oh boy, no, we're going to do this now and then we're going to get it done. But what's often incorporated into that state that that's not so great for my system, it's probably not so great for my relationships either, is the fear, is the anxiety, is the the sort of sense of self-worth that gets tied to the accomplishment of that task, as opposed to a more organic, structured way of moving through the world, where we're listening to our rhythms, we're listening to our needs, and we're moving at the pace of life. So I talked about this in a recent video about moving at the pace of life. So I'm going to take another bite of toast, sip some coffee. I'm going to invite you guys who are listening, think about this. Well, like, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to move at the pace of life? Bueller, anyone? Thoughts, ideas, comments? So what I heard recently, what I heard was an audiobook, that moving at the pace of life for us actually goes back to the pace of walking, that we can't process life faster than we can walk. So most of us are in and out of our cars multiple times a day. Some of us are on and off planes or trains all the time. We're definitely moving faster than the pace of life. And just because the pace of life out there, as it has come through postmodern development in the last, let's say, 100 years, it's really kind of gone off the charts. 150 years maybe. But moving by car, moving by train, moving by like steamship, not walking, not moving by horse or carriage, but by automotive means, right? We're moving faster constantly than our systems, than our bodies, our nervous systems are actually designed to move. So I wonder if, that doesn't kind of contribute to a state of sort of fatigue, or possibly even like a low-grade shock, like all the time, that we've just become we've become acclimated to. So slowing down and moving at the pace of life is actually walking, which is why I think it's wonderful to walk, to digest emotionally or physically. Not necessarily hike or sprint or fucking run. Why the hell should we be running? I really don't understand. Unless you like it. Unless you like it or you're being chased. But walking. Susan says, my Kundalini experience has forced me to a crawl and I've had no choice. Used to be annoying, not anymore. I so relate with that. And I said on another recent live that I feel like moving at the pace of grief is like living life as an earthworm, basically. Like everything has to be slowed down so much more in order to be able to digest it. And grief specifically is it's a state of decomposition. So if we're trying to move faster and trying to create faster than the rate that we are decomposing, we're essentially applying like opposing Newtonian, for lack of a better word, Newtonian forces within ourselves, right? And they're actually not Newtonian forces. I mean, yeah, he may have named them, but entropy versus whatever the state of creativity is. What's the syntropy is actually the opposite of entropy. It's not written as a thermodynamic law, but it has been spoken about. It is the tendency for systems to coalesce and become more cohesive over time, whereas entropy is the opposite. Entropy is the decompositions of systems over the state of time. And they're complementary, you know. Syntropy isn't something that you're likely to hear about if you look up sort of in the modern scientific terminology, but I believe it was a group of Swiss scientists that came up with the term to describe the opposing force of entropy. Eddie Bruegel says, I read in a book that our systems are still built for instant gratification. I would love to hear more about that. That they are built or that they are not built for instant gratification. If you think about the way that our ancestors were brought up, there were very few things that were instant. Very few things. Nothing in life is really instant. I mean, we can have insights and awarenesses that are instantaneous, and that's a beautiful process. But even with those insights that may become instantaneously, like a download, to use that lingo if you like that, there's still time needed to integrate it emotionally and specifically to actually for it to move down to a denser level. Our ancestors did everything really a lot slower. They had to. They didn't have technology at their fingertips. They didn't have, the most technology that people had for a long time was fire. And then they had the wheel, and then they could figure out how to do things with wheels. Because we are naturally, as humans, we're innovative. And our innovation, I think our spirit of innovation has sort of gotten ahead of our actual neurological capacity, and we are and will be catching up to ourselves for a long, long time, especially the more that we interface with this kind of technology. So it's kind of a double bind, because here I am using this technology to connect with you, the majority of you who live nowhere near me. A couple of you do here. But for the most part, like, this technology has created a state of communication that is kind of almost unprecedented unless you look at the potential of psychic communication, which it would be mimicking. Not that it would be leading to more of that. Probably less of that in some ways, like, because people need filters, like, for real. Susan C. Snyder says, my experiences has been mimicking depression, yet it's quite different. Tired, exhausted, moving through lifetimes of crud, healing lifetimes of crud. I relate to that. And it's okay. I like that you made the distinction of mimicking depression. If you want to say more about that, Susan, about that distinction between mimicking depression and having depression, I would love that. I feel like I've been in a similar state myself, because having been wired for anxiety for the majority of my life, and having experienced what some people might call a Kundalini type phenomena back in, 2018 or so. What I would say about that, is just psychologically, neurologically, emotionally, physically, my whole system got to a level where I was holding and suppressing more energy than it could manage anymore, and I started having sort of these breakthrough bursts of energy. And anybody who's actually experienced anything like that, that's like Kundalini-like in nature, you know that you wouldn't wish it on your worst fucking enemy. These people These people who talk about Kundalini awakening as if it's some like high elevated spiritual progress thing are just so fucking full of shit. It is uncomfortable because it essentially what is happening is your nervous system is being grounded and rewired so that it can actually contain more energy. It can be pleasant if you can shift your context around it to where you are in acceptance of this fact that you need to move through life at the pace of an earthworm in order to effectively and gently and safely integrate that energy. But if you think that you're going to have an experience like that and that you're just going to go zippity doo off, off on your little ascension program, like that's not what's happening, and that's not what's going to happen. I'm cautious of becoming too esoteric with any process. I'm really cautious about it because in my experience, a lot of spirituality, particularly as it relates to sort of ascensionism and the raising of vibration, it turns into escapism. It turns into leaving the body behind in search of higher, more pleasant frequencies. And I'll tell you from personal experience, what's the difference between a spiritual junkie and a person who's out there on the street, like hitting up dealers to get their high? Well, it's maybe a little bit less damaging on your body, but maybe not in the long term. It's certainly more socially acceptable to practice spiritual escapism than it is to practice chemical dependency and escapism. And yet the effects are the same. The effects are that we wind up disconnected from our hearts. We wind up disconnected from being able to feel a state of empathy with ourselves and others. We wind up putting our focus on the next sort of high elevated state or experience, be that individually or in a group setting. So if you look at like the sort of the fundamentals of what plays out in those scenarios, they're nearly identical. And I'm not judging. It's something that I grew up watching people do around me, go on the ascension seeking path, right? And then it's something that, watching people get spiritually high around me is like, well, it just felt natural for me, as a teenager to go and start start getting high myself. And it took a little while to kind of to come back around, because the tendency is, we tend to recreate what's familiar. So we were talking about cults on the podcast that we recorded today. One of the things that we talked about there is how anybody who's sort of raised in a cult environment will have a proclivity towards cults, often for the rest of their lives, at least for a long time, until they